Before we start, if you guys enjoy spooky stories about rules, horror, or time travel, for the time being, be sure to drop a subscribe if you enjoy this content. Let's get into the story. As I entered a clearing in the Congo jungle, I instantly felt a choking wave of fear. Archaeological equipment was strewn all about, as if a giant toddler had thrown a tantrum. Judging from the overgrowth and mud, it was clear no one had touched this place in months. This was what remained of Dr. Langley's expedition. Professor Langley is one of the foremost experts in Central African culture and history, and I am his intern. Imagine his annoyance when rumors began to spread of a stone temple in the middle of the Congo. The tales persisted and even grew. This supposed temple in the jungle was the most ancient temple ever built by a civilization that preceded all others, and it supposedly contained secrets that would turn history on its head. Dr. Langley initially turned up his nose at the news, knowing that sooner or later this would be proven a hoax. Now that I was in the jungle myself, I approached the scattered equipment. The guides I hired already ditched me, refusing to get any closer. The place was cursed, they said. No one ever returned. At least, not until Dr. Langley. I found what I was looking for after a short search. A computer bag. It was fortunately waterproof and the laptop inside wasn't damaged. As I took out a screwdriver so that I could replace the battery, I could hear my heart pound in my ears. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of what the past would reveal. The tale of this supposed temple had grown to a degree that Dr. Langley couldn't remain silent anymore. To prove it wasn't real once and for all, he organized an expedition personally. He left his classes in the middle of the year, saying he would be back in a week or two. Instead, he and his team fell off the face of the earth. For 3 months, no one knew where they were. It wasn't until I received the call from a mental hospital that I had learned the truth. Dr. Langley was now a psychiatric patient. He had apparently been found wandering into a jungle village, scratches all over his eyes and babbling nonsense. It took some time for Congolese officials to apprehend him, and even longer for them to return him home. When I visited, all I found was a man screaming and banging himself against the padded walls. He was in a straitjacket, supposedly to keep him from clawing his own eyes out. In his mad ramblings, only a single word could be understood. Laptop. I set one of the tables back up and booted up the laptop. What could cause one of the most educated men I've ever met to go completely insane? I gulped, sweating even more than usual in the jungle heat. The professor's computer was filled with the usual files, academic studies, archaeological data, and even his own personal journal entries. There was, however, an odd folder on the desktop. The name was a random jumble of letters and numbers. I accessed the folder and found things that made my knees weak. The data inside told of things I and the world were not ready for. The temple was very real. It was less than a mile to the east. They only set up camp here to maintain a satellite uplink, which they never used. Much of what was typed out was gibberish, but there was a single report that had been scanned in rather than typed. It detailed a sample from the temple, an apparent artifact made by humans. I cried out when I read the result. This artifact was radiometrically dated to 10 million years ago. That had to be a mistake. Modern humans didn't appear until 200,000 years ago. Human civilization itself didn't even start until about 5,000 years ago. An item made millions of years before? It defied all logic. As I continued to look through the files, I found an entry that contained less gibberish than the others. A single portion stood out to me, although it needed a little cleaning up. Don't look. All of humanity, a lie. Don't look. The first message. The first words. Don't look. We always knew deep down, don't look. The first wall. The first words. My eyes have lied to me, get them out, don't look. The rest was unreadable. If humanity did exist millions of years ago, in defiance of all evidence, Did they build this temple? How did the building survive through the eons? Moreover, this insane rambling mentioned a wall with writings. Did these humans leave words behind? Whatever it was, it had driven an extremely intelligent and proud man to insanity. I should have left it alone. I should have said the expedition was killed by natives or leopards or anything else. Instead, my academic curiosity overpowered me. I was a student of history. I couldn't leave such discovery unknown. I closed the laptop and turned towards the east and the temple. I marched through the jungle once again, determined to learn the truth. The truth, however, can be dangerous to the seeker. I found the temple surprisingly easily. How it remained hidden all this time is a mystery to me. It was made of white stone, but was covered in vines, roots, and moss. That was probably why it hadn't been spotted by satellites until now. It didn't resemble the architecture of any nearby civilizations. It was square and simple, with steps leading down to a round entrance. Inside it was pitch black, even at the threshold of the opening. I took my flashlight out and descended the steps. Down, down, down into infinity I went, stretching onwards into oblivion. I walked and walked, wondering if the staircase would ever end. The longer I descended deeper into the earth, the more I noticed how wrong everything was. There were no bats, no hanging stalactites, and not a hint of decay. All the stone, perfectly chiseled, didn't have a single chip. I must have walked hundreds of feet into the earth before I reached a solid floor. As I stepped into the new room, I swept my flashlight around. I found myself in a vaulted chamber surrounded by columns. It was almost Egyptian in appearance, but there were savage spikes halfway up the cylinders. My curiosity got the better of me, and I let my guard down. I circled one of the columns, looking for any etchings or carvings. Instead, I found a skull with rotten, dried flesh peeling off. I let out a scream in terror, and I scrambled backwards. My shoe went through something, a loud crunch echoing through the massive room. My eyes darted down to see a rib cage in which I was buried up to my ankle in. I scrambled away, my eyes spinning wildly. Everywhere, scattered in all directions, were skeletons. They were the countless remains, wearing all different kinds of clothing of seekers before me. Some were relatively modern looking, resembling explorers with collared shirts and safari helmets. Others were dressed from the ancient times, Arabic, Roman, Greek, Egyptian. All the different styles were represented in the sea of bones. Each time my light turned, I found more in this grim boneyard. Finally, the beam found another column, and I realized a truth darker than I could imagine. The body was like many of the others, clothes wasted away to rags. The cause of death was clear. There was a pickaxe through one of the eye sockets, pinning the skeleton to the stone. The fingers, they were still curved around the handle, holding tight even in death. The person, whoever it was, had impaled themselves. What could motivate someone to do that? As the creeping horror churned in my guts, I began to check the other bodies. In their hands were weapons and tools, swords, chisels, axes. All were near vital areas like wrists, necks, and stomachs. All of these people killed themselves, desperate to throw their lives away after learning the truth. My chest was tightening and my vision was narrowing. I was in a temple of death, and all who entered sliced themselves to pieces once they saw what was inside. I began stumbling and grabbing at my narrowing throat. As my flashlight wheeled around, something glinted in the light. As it distracted me from my situation, I fixated on it. I ran over, crossing 3 more of the columns and dozens of more rotting skeletons. When I arrived at what was glimmering in the light, I found it was something round with glass over it. I instantly recognized it. It was a compass. When I stepped close to it, A stench filled my nose. I staggered backwards, covering my face. It was the smell of death. A body in this room was still rotting. I shined my flashlight around, trying to find the source of this smell. I inspected the compass carefully, and I noticed that the glass of the compass was broken, as if it had been dropped from high up. I looked at the spikes halfway up the column. With my beam of light trembling, I slowly lifted my flashlight upwards. I wailed against my hand. I recognized him. It was one of the students that had accompanied the professor. All that remained was a desiccated corpse hanging from a rope tied to one of the spikes. The rotting purple flesh had curled from around the mouth, giving a hideous grimace. The eye sockets, though empty, were staring right at me. I turned away and retched. A rotting corpse, hanging in a sea of skeletons. I leaned back up, wiping my mouth. I dare not turn around. Every screaming skull, split wrists, sliced neck, they were all crying at me to turn and to run away from this place. Yet, I know if I left, I would only be drawn back. The insatiable curiosity of man was to find answers. Although each and every body I found filled me with terror and revulsion, they also filled me with a stronger desire to learn what drove them here. I could not take it anymore. I could be the one. I could take the truth and not die. Keeping my eyes away from the hanging corpse, I shined my light down the columned room and quickly began marching. I would reach the end. I would find the truth, whatever terror it might behold. The bravery of fools. The further I walked in the huge chamber, the more skeletons I found. The clothes and armor worn by these bodies varied wildly. The number of them, they were endless, and they had all taken their own lives. I even saw some of them wearing things I didn't recognize. Crystal-like shards or styles and colors that I have never seen before. Could these be from civilizations before ours? Humanity from millions of years ago? The question intrigued me, and I did not stop. If I had, I would lose my nerve and run away. I had to know the truth. I had to see what caused this madness, no matter how tight my stomach knotted or my heart pounded. After what seemed like hours, this chamber ended. There was now a solid wall, completely covered with skeletons. In the center of this wall was an entranceway and more stairs. I paused once more. Deeper into the earth? How deep was it going to go? I felt as if I was descending into levels of hell, and I was only at the entrance. More unsure than ever, I began to descend once again. There wasn't a break from death either. The stairs were littered with broken bodies and dust from rotten bones. It was clear people had trampled down these steps and stomped those remains apart. As I traveled, the same familiar scent overpowered my nose. The scent of rot, the scent of death. The quivering terror returned quickly. Another fresh body was close by, and in the enclosed passage, the smell would be intense. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a cloth I had used to wipe my sweat away. Despite the cloth being soaked, I clutched it to my nose, trying to keep the scent away. I unsteadily digressed, crunching on bones. My light finally found the source of this smell, and I flinched and took a step back. Another member of the professor's team was rotting in this temple. The dehydrated corpse was sprawled across several steps. Their fingers were on their neck, without nails. They had clawed their own throat open. Even worse, there were claw marks around what remained of the eye sockets. They had first gouged their eyes out. I collapsed against the wall and grabbed my chest. My heart pounded so hard, every beat was painful. How many people had this temple consumed? What horror could possibly be written in this place to cause this much death? As horrible as the truth must be, I had to know. I edged my way around the dead body. I irrationally thought it would spring to life and attack me at any moment. I finally went by it and continued downwards. I wasn't far from the bottom, it seemed, and one final horror awaited me. The entranceway to the next chamber was blocked. No matter how hard I covered my nose, I could not escape the pungent smell of decay. Bodies were piled on the ground, up to my waist. It was the final 4 men of the expedition. In their manic attempt to escape, they had clogged up the entrance, trapping themselves. This did not stop them from mangling their eyes and throats. My eyes watered and I struggled to breathe. Awkwardly, I began to kick at the bodies, trying to get them to fall back inside. The eyeless skulls wobbled each time I struck, as if screaming out in pain. After several agonizing tries, the bodies caved. With a wet, sickening thud, they collapsed back out. I hopped over the corpses as quickly as I could and entered the final chamber. Despite my flashlight, the room was too big for me to make anything out of it. I was surrounded by darkness, as far as the eye could see. Near the ground, however, I spotted something bright and yellow. It was an extension cord. I leaned down and picked it up before following it. I recognized this type of cord. It was specifically designed for archaeologists to set up lights in ruins like this one. After tracing the cord back to its source, I found a generator. I gave it a quick examination and found that it had been tossed and kicked around, but it was still intact. More cords extended out of it like a spider web. As I shined my light around, my blood ran cold. I knew what this setup was. It was for spotlights, like the kind used to illuminate large areas. A quick journey along each cord revealed the spotlights and stands that held them up. They had simply been knocked over, and none of the bulbs were broken. Numbly, I picked each one upright, even plugging in the last cord that had been dragged away in apparent insanity. I then returned to the generator. It was designed not to damage ruins, so it did not work on gasoline. There was no starter cord to pull or noxious fumes. Only a push of a button would activate it. My hands trembled over the button. The first words of mankind waited for me in this darkness. Words that drove all who saw them into madness and suicide. Generations of humanity for years, for millions of years, had sacrificed themselves for the answer. Now I had come for it, and I hesitated. I wanted to know the answer, but should I know? Should I listen to the fear screaming at me to run? Or should I cave in to my curiosity? The curiosity that had driven humanity since the beginning, the curiosity that led to all these men's deaths. In the end, I could not resist. I would maintain my sanity. I was sure of it. I was stronger than all those who had died before me. I pressed the button, and the generator hummed to life. A few moments later, the floodlights lit up. I turned and looked upon the wall. My eyes widened as the words filled my vision. It was written in the language all humanity could read, even if we had never learned it before. It spoke the words we all knew but refused to acknowledge. All of humanity was in those words, and it was madness. I could feel my sanity slipping, and I screamed. I retched in terror, my last sane thoughts oozing out of my ears and eyes. I should have listened to my fear. I should have run and listened to my instincts. Instead, I looked, and as I did, I clawed at my eyes. In this temple, those were the first words written by humanity, carved into stone, the words that would drive any man to madness. The words they said, "Don't look." But I had come this far. I could not repress my curiosity any longer. My eyes, they wandered up. Above it was etched a representation of the most horrific entity I had ever imagined. A formless mass of flesh, pustules, and hollow, unseeing eyes. It seemed to pulsate and glow. The entire cavernous darkness rumbled like the beating of a heart. Then it spoke. You stand before the heart of the world. Remove your eyes. They have always lied to you. See with a mind unclouded all that we are, and come unto your Maker. I understood now what it was that the people before me had encountered. I closed my eyes, hoping against hope that would work, that would somehow stop it. Fool! The heart's voice echoed in my mind. Let me help you. I felt my hands reaching for my face. I couldn't stop them. I closed them. I closed my eyes. I felt my nails dig into them. I screamed, and I screamed. Release your mind. I felt the terrible texture of iris and sclera on my fingers as they tore away at my face, ravenous as beasts. Finally, I could feel only the vast emptiness of the hollowed caverns that were my eye sockets. The air and the emptiness felt refreshing. Vast vistas of darkness and flesh opened up before me. This horrid, endlessly multiplying mass of meat that called itself humanity was but an extension of the heart of the world. I could see now the corpses all around me for what they truly were. Scathing, imperfect replicas of the true singularity. This division, this individuality, these concepts, they are an abomination, an insult to the greatness of our Creator. There is only one reasonable answer to atone for such a sin. I reached for a rusted blade that had long ago implanted itself into a mound of flesh. The heart had opened my eyes. I could now see the world better than ever before. The gleam of decay of the corroded blade lit up a smile on my face. I stretched my smile further as I could not contain my rapturous glee of having found the truth. My jaws snapped and unhinged from my skull. How pleasant the feeling was. How liberating. I buried the corroded knife deep into my heart. I must cut out this deceiver, this pale replica. It is nothing compared to the heart of the world. Ha 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 ha.